Hello, and welcome to Permission to Be. I'm your host, Becca Epley, joined today by my good friend and co-host, Tommy Allgood. Permission to Be exists to be a space of hope for those journeying to find their true, authentic selves. We hope that the story shared here will inspire you on your own journey and help you unlock the permission to be who you have always truly been.
Yo, what up, my friends? Welcome to the Permission to Be podcast. I don't think I've ever said, yo, what up, my friends? There you go. That's how we're going to introduce this today. We have a really awesome conversation, and I can tell you that I've just spent the last 5 minutes getting geared up for it. But I am here with the one and only Becca Epley.
Hey.
And today we have the distinct honor and pleasure of stepping into some conversation surrounding art and anti-racism in the art space with our friend Jade Soul Zuberi. What's up, brother? How's it going?
It was good.
So Jade is, I'm just going off of his Instagram, pro multi-artist, anti-racism, dismantling white supremacy, decolonization, educator, artivist, warrior of God.
Yes.
I'm excited, yo.
Me too.
Okay, so you put warrior of God first. So like,
Yes.
what was it? Was there any, when you were one of the things I already picked up about Jade, and because we literally just met 5 minutes ago. He said this himself. He was like, he thinks deeply about things. So was there any thought of how you ordered these things?
Yes. So just right off the bat, like, I have to give the distinction for those who might listen to this. When I say warrior of God, that is disconnected from Christianity or religion. And that's only within the realm of my walk with Christ. As it just pertains to the lifestyle of dismantling white supremacy and what it means to basically go about a particular life, that I am a warrior of light and I'm a warrior of God and wrath and righteousness and humility. Again, all separate from religion, right? Because that's all constructed. So for me, it's like, I'm giving these particular tools in whatever way that shows up for me. So if that's within sociology and anti-racism, if that's within speaking out about something through my dance, if that's within making my music, my film photography, whatever way that God talks to me, I'm going to be that warrior to send that message out. So I'm basically just a vessel on the front lines of doing my justice, however way that I see fit. So.
Love that definition. So much.
What that is.
When hearing you say that, and I'm thinking about so many of the people that we've interviewed in the past, and I can't help but juxtapose that with sort of my spiritual journey growing up, Jehovah's Witness.
Same. Yeah.
What? No way.
Yep.
Oh, shit's about to get real, yo.
Oh. Whatever you have going on in an hour, you might need to move it. Not really. No way.
Yep.
All right. Well, this conversation just got about 100 times more interesting.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
That language, for me, it just carries so much baggage. And so, but people, what I've been noticing is, as I've been having these conversations around anti-racism of late, in all the areas that it infiltrates through, but especially art, when people are using terminologies like warrior of God or follower of Christ, there's this sort of reclamation that's sort of happening for me in that, and also not just a reclamation, but an expansion to sort of my Africana roots of, like, God was so much more expansive than this version of Christianity that I was handed growing up. In this one way. And it's even, I find it really easy to talk about evangelical Christianity because I feel like Jehovah's Witnesses really mimic that, but even though they were a distinct entity separate from evangelical Christianity, there's just so many parallels and similarities in the fundamentalist aspect of it. So tell me a bit, or tell our audience, already selfish me. So, what has been, you said earlier before we started recording that you've been doing anti-racism education for about a year, and then also talked about like your dance and sort of like people out talking about thinking that you had, when you started dancing, you were dancing for years and it was something you had just picked up. Right. But what has sort of been your journey, and especially knowing like sort of this fun, like how steeped in that religious practice were you, and just sort of, can we riff on that for a little bit?
Absolutely, man. Okay.
Just see it going here.
As far as the Jehovah's Witness process, that was short-lived, but I do know that was a pretty like important staple of mine when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And my dad was a Jehovah's Witness, and then my mom kind of just fell into it. But I did the whole like knocking on the door process. Yep. And that was extremely annoying, and I had no idea why. I just knew I didn't want to do it. I did the whole standing up and reading from the scripture in a room full of just very stern men, and they're like very appropriate wives, and even that felt weird to me, and I couldn't really put my finger on why. I just knew I was like, I don't want to do this. So it just felt really weird, and then once my parents split, that obviously meant that had to split for me, so I didn't really partake in that anymore. And then I transitioned over into like Christianity with my mom, and then we started going to church and everything, and that was more like every Sunday you wear your Sunday best, and I was like, do I have to wear this? Like, I don't feel like wearing these clothes, like, especially if I feel obligated to do it. And just notice how even some of the kids there were like some of the adults too, and I'm like, you don't want to just go outside and play, So it was just those things. It just was kind of just always in my space, and that was like the bulk of my like younger years. And then I started realizing once I started going to this other church called Word of Faith, and back when I lived back in Detroit, which is where I'm from. And that was like the staple of everything. And I just noticed how people's behaviors were. And it just didn't really work with me. And then it wasn't until I graduated back in 2010 from high school, and then that's when I started kind of breaking away from social norms, and then started educating myself on things that I wasn't never educated on, either within the household I grew up in or within the schools that I grew up in, because most of the schools of my life were predominantly white. And then it was my high school that became very multi-racial. Like we had a lot of Lebanese people, some Asians, mostly blacks, and then mostly white. So it was like the three of us that was in high school, because Dearborn Heights within Michigan has like a very heavily like Lebanese culture of people. So that was just something I always knew. And then once I started hearing like certain terms like cultural appropriation, and then started digging a little bit more inside of, this was back in like 2011, and started doing more research on the histories of like Thanksgiving. That's when I was like, oh, so this holiday isn't real. So already I started having some reservations about that. Still celebrated out of obligation because I didn't move out of my house yet. So I still just celebrated because my family did it. But I kind of already started asking those questions to myself of like, okay, so this holiday it's not really a thing. And then started looking at other holidays of like, so is Easter a real thing? And then looked at, even Black History Month of like, why is it only jammed into a month? So I just started forming all these different questions.
All on your own. All
on my own. Like I didn't have a fellow like Malcolm X. I didn't have a fellow person that was like a MLK that was in my ear. All of these questions were literally formulating on my own. just from me having my own like mind now. Once I got
Yeah.
further away from social norms, so I just started
Yep.
realizing that things just weren't making sense to me anymore. And then I
Wow.
started questioning, even like Christianity. I was like, okay, Christianity doesn't really make sense either. I was like, why is it that we have to abide by a book on when it's right to have sex? You know, and then I even fought with my mom about dating someone that was like twice my age, and it was legal, you know, and totally mutual. And I was just like, she's really pushing like religion onto me, and I'm like, well, hold on, like, shouldn't we be with who we feel we're drawn to, you know? So then I had that whole fight with my mom. It was just we just started bumping heads the older I got, with just social norms. And then it wasn't until I moved back in 2000, I think 15, moved down to California for my first time, and I moved in, you know, to my partner's house that I'm still with now. We're in an interracial relationship, and we've been together for 5 years. Yeah, and she was even different too. Like she, you know, was bi, you know, and even within that, I was like, oh, this was like my first relationship with someone that had another relationship with the opposite sex,
Yeah.
you know. So I just started diving into things that totally went against what I grew up around. So it was way easier for me to start questioning things now. And then I started developing more relationships with indigenous people and natives. That then started to have me look more inwardly to my heritage. And I was like, oh, I'm like actually indigenous as well, Afro Native of Blackfoot, you know, and I think even Cherokee. And then I started doing even more research about my, you know, ethnicity as well, and that gave me even more bigger sense of like who I am in the world.
Yeah.
And then wasn't until I moved to Arizona that I think that was around maybe 2016 or so with my partner, and then that's when everything started really shifting in a major way. In 2016, I've always been outspoken, so that isn't something that's new.
Yeah.
I've always been outspoken. I've always been someone that has ruffled feathers, even within my own household with my mom. We bumped heads a lot, you know, and that got me into a lot of trouble. But I was like, man, at the end of the day, if you have a question, you should ask it. So it just wasn't always well received. But so I've always been outspoken. And then it wasn't until 2016, once we moved to Arizona, that's when I really started doing more research into the history of Thanksgiving. And then that's when all of the other killings were happening, like Trayvon Martin and Shamir Rice really started to surface. And then I was just like, oh, this is actually like racism, you know? And then that really started to surface more inside of me. And I was like, why the hell are we being killed for no reason? Then I was like really scared to even drive, because I'm like, if I'm knowing that people like Philandro Castro are being killed in their own car, you know, or people that are sleeping, I can't remember his name, but people who are falling asleep and then they're just shot a whole bunch of times, like, why would I feel safe driving? You know, so all these other questions started happening. And then I started speaking more about that into the dance community. And then once that happened, other intersections started happening. Then that's when cultural appropriation started to resurface for me. And then I did way more research on Thanksgiving. And I was like, oh, so it's not real at all. And it was actually covering up what happened to my fellow natives and ancestors. And I just stopped celebrating it. And obviously that ruffled a lot of feathers back home in my family. And I was like, well, you know, at the end of the day, this is my choice. So you're either with it or you're not. And then that's when I broke off with Christianity finally. Once I realized that that was something that was also created to control us. And I was like, I'm not breaking off the relationship with God, you know, but because God is anything we want them to be, you know, but it's more of like, it's a principle for me of what I go by, you know, and it's something, a means for me to follow in a way to keep me in check without it perpetuating white supremacy. So the rest is pretty much history. And I've just been speaking up about injustice, racial injustice, and civil rights since 2016. And it wasn't until last year that I dived into anti-racism due to another partner that is bi that I was with. And she was inside of anti-racism. She was white, but she was a student of it. And then she brought me inside of that. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, I had no idea this term even existed. And then after that, I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. So here I am.
Oh my gosh. So I feel a lot of parallels in your story. And as I've been sort of processing my deconstruction and sort of what I guess my current awakenings, the things that I'm awakening to right now, I've gone back to start questioning, because I was raised up as a Jehovah's Witness and like full throated, bought into it, was like
Yeah.
in high school auxiliary pioneer, which is like going door to door, putting in like 50 hours. And I was working on being like a regular pioneer, put 70 hours a month, knocking on doors, trying to like convert people.
Yeah.
Like I actually enjoy getting up on stage. They called it the Theocratic Ministry School, and they trained you to evangelize and to go out and preach and give you scripts, and to how to, like, if people didn't want to hear about you, here are some things to maneuver around how, like, people's objections and conversation stoppers, and here's how you reason from the scriptures. And so, like, this ingrained, like, and so when you were saying that, I feel like that set me up though to ask questions. I feel like I've never been discouraged from asking questions. I've been cautioned where I find the answers to the questions that I asked from that. But I feel, for me, like growing up, it instilled in me like this vociferous thirst for knowledge and for study, and to like uncover things that I don't understand. So I remember, and for me, that like my trajectory was awakening to my queerness and praying the gay away, and trying to be like, all right, God, why is it bad that I feel these things when like I've felt these things as long as I can feel these things? We're trying to like find things to put onto it. And I think the detriment to that for me is that I feel like I grew up pretty colorblind, and because of the way that the organization is structured. And I don't know what to do with that in this iteration, because like the experiences of being able to travel internationally and meet somebody of a similar faith, and you are automatically share that bond. Like I've lived that and I've experienced that. And so it's like, what it feels like in some ways they live as where the goal is when we talk about the work of anti-racism in terms of this unity. But yet, and still, I see the oppressive structures and influences of white supremacy guiding and dictating who's in and who's out. And so I guess the long way of saying, I was like, I wonder if that foundation sort of sets you up for the way in which you study and consume information and motivate you, because I feel like I've always had this strong sense of justice, and I've always and the thing for me, it was really difficult to stop believing in God, but the God that I knew had to transition and change.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, man. That's such a complex question, but it's a really great question though. Yeah, I mean, I never thought about it like that. It possibly could have, been a foundation. I do know, like, as far as my background goes, like, I've been dancing for over 10 years, and I started dancing. Not necessarily on a serious level, but to the point where I could intentionally want to dance ever since 3rd grade. So I pretty much became very popular, because the schools that we had all the way to 4th grade, and then we transitioned to another school, and that was middle school, 5th to 8th, and then went to another school that was all in the same county, and then that was from 9th to 10th, or 9th to 12th. So basically, my whole reputation from dance carried me the entire way all the way until I graduated high school. So as far as that discipline went, for me, I don't even know where it came from. I just know anything that I feel natural doing, even though I'm uncomfortable in it, if it feels natural for me, I'm going to put my all inside of it. And that's what I did with dance, because it felt so natural. I didn't really have to think about it. Even though I had my points of like having to really push through to get to the next level, and being uncomfortable in many, many phases of my dance career, it still always felt natural for me. And I think that's the exact same thing that I feel now within anti-racism and decolonization work is that it just feels natural. Like the fact that anybody can say to me, "You don't know what you're talking about," and I'm just like, "Okay, cool." Like it just has no effect on me. I don't have to look like maybe I don't. Like, nope, because I understand I've done hours and hours of studying. Like, I have a mentor, who's been in this work way longer than I have that I can turn to if I need counsel. Like there's tons of other Black powerful women that I follow within this work that I know we share the exact same, method of things where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on the right path. So if someone just comes along and tries to derail me off of it, I'm way too unfuckable for that. Because it feels too natural. So I'm like, that's cool. Great. Next. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and I mean, there's every question that you answer, like there's 100 different directions that I feel like I could go with it, and like I'm really I'm trying to be conscious, like I don't want to like dominate the conversation. So
I was just gonna see if you would riff a little bit more on specifically anti-racism and the dance community and how that melds together in your life.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as far as I know, from last year, being inside of speaking about racial injustices and the civil rights movement, I understand that I was doing some type of impact all the way from 2016. Like I've created a few projects. I've been a part of some, theater shows, that really shed light within a very dance and physical manner. But it just didn't feel enough for me. I didn't really feel like it was really making a dent. So it wasn't until I got, aware of what anti-racism was that really shifted my mentality in general of like, oh, okay, so I was doing like a form of the work, but it wasn't really making people uncomfortable. So once I got into that, then, as people say, like once the veil is lifted, you can't unsee. So once that happened, and I dove into terms like microaggressions and things like what it means to be colonized, anti-Blackness, internalized racism, I was like, holy shit, like this is everywhere in the dance community. So I couldn't unsee it. So it just showed up everywhere. Like I felt like, I don't know if you've ever seen Daredevil, the old movie with Ben Affleck, but once he figured out his senses, he couldn't unhear things. Like it was almost like, damn, like things just sound way louder to me now because he can't see. So he had to go off his other sense. So that's literally how I feel and felt once that veil was lifted. I can have conversations with people and then literally see like, oh, that was racist. Where maybe 5 years ago, I'd be like, oh, that wasn't racist at all because I didn't even know that something could be racist if it wasn't overt. So now I'm like, oh, this is totally different. So once now I have this knowledge, I'm like, okay, if I have this knowledge and I know that I'm in two different communities, it's my job to be able to bridge the gap of that. So that way I can really start to benefit and really give back to the community that has given so much to me. And not only that, but also give back as much as I can to my people, and the people that I represent in a way that they can truly be liberated and that we're not taking things because we feel like that's all we have. We're now creating things because we know we can.
It's so, I think for me, like what I've noticed for me and as I've engaged in a lot of this work is waking up to how language shifts and flows through time. And I felt I was in that trap of looking at racism in one way as sort of this good bad binary, this thing that is solely based on how you treat a person. And what the work has done for me is help me to look at systems critically.
Yes.
And because like it's understanding that as we talk about it today, racism is systemic.
Yes.
And I think what we tend to do is we forget origin stories. Our history and our narrative tradition is so profound and so powerful because it always reminds us of the origin story. It always reminds us of why we do the things that we do.
Yeah.
But I think that white supremacy is so insidious that it doesn't want you to remember its origin story.
Absolutely.
Right?
No.
And so now what I'm stepping into, because I think for a bit there, I felt a bit burnt out in the work. And what I recognize is, and Andre Henry has been really instrumental for me in this, is that the work also needs to be creative. The work needs to be based in art. And so I love this term that you have, artivist.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually came across the word, I think it was last year, and it was from an indigenous woman that called herself an artivist. I was like, oh, I love that. Like, that's perfect. Like, that's absolutely perfect in what I do. But I kept calling myself, I'm an artist and an activist anytime I had to explain what I do or who I identify as. And then once I heard that term, I was like, that's literally both interconnected. But I feel personally, a lot what goes into my work is I try to bring about a lot of the parallels from anti-racism and artistry, and how just like a lot of us in the dance community will look at art and will like, wow, we need to do our due diligence on knowing the history of these dance cultures, right? Like we need to understand that there's terminologies if we're going to teach these dance forms, right? So I try to bring that relatability of like, if you're going to be in this work, there is also terminologies you need to know. You know, like racism, I tell everyone all the time in the dance community, racism is a studied field. So you can't really understand it if you don't experience it, if you don't study it, right? So you have to actually be in it to study it so that way you can know how it works and how it doesn't want to be seen. So I try my best to use all the avenues and gifts that I have, whether it's through music or whether it's through filming and photography, to speak to those things if maybe my words can't get across through that. And then I'll use my dance to, you know, really say what I need to say, but through a physical manifestation. Or maybe I need to produce music and then maybe have a particular way, you know, that I can sift that message through, because obviously we're dancers, so we love to dance and music. Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you're not really going to hear me talk to you, then maybe I have to put that message in my music and just play it because I'm also a DJ. So there's also that I can get that out, you know, or if it's maybe through photography of, like, I just made a photograph last year, and it was actually a part of a film that I did called Legacy. And it was a concept video, but I took a photo for the poster. And basically I had my ex-partner, because she's a makeup specialist, and I had her create whip marks on my back. So that way people could see what things would look like in modern times. Because obviously a lot of people still think that slavery is like a thing of the past, and it's like, oh, that
black and white photo
back then. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, well, what would it look like if it was in color? So I did that, and then I also made it a concept video where there was flashes of imagery of lynching, of our people being lynched, and then we go back to me being hit by music as like, that's what I have to constantly feel when I deal with microaggressions or racism that's more overt, you know. And then it quoted James Baldwin at the end of like, yeah, we can't change everything, you know, we can't always change everything, you know, until we face it, you know, that very like profound quote. And that was something I feel the dance community needs to know, you know, because at the end of the day, the dancers still think that politics don't exist in the dance realm, right? But I'm like, they literally are very parallel. Like, what Black culture comes from is political, right? Like, if we look to hip hop culture in the Bronx, a lot of those projects were burnt down because of racism, right? Yep. So the only way that my people that were pioneers that made these cultures, these subcultures, how they thrived was, okay, cool, we don't have our project. Okay, what else can we do? Let's go to the basketball court and let's create a party. Okay, cool, let's do that, right? Let's create these dances because we can't get work. Okay, cool, let's do that, right? And then you have all these dances that come out that white people just take, and then they market and profit off of that on TikTok, right? Which is also very anti-Black. And then they just furthermore perpetuate white supremacy, but then all by excluding, oh, but don't talk about politics and dance though. Like, keep politics out of it. Like, okay, but the fact that you're even perpetuating or sorry, not perpetuating, the fact that you're even benefiting off of black art and you're not black is political in itself. So at the end of the day, that's why I call myself an artivist, because I'm using both sides of the coin to share a very powerful message any way that I can.
What a time to be alive, yo.
Man, you ain't never lied. You ain't never lied.
And listening artist to artist, it's really easy to understand why we tell story through art, why art is such a powerful medium. But for for the person that might not see art in that way, what would you say to them?
Well, I've definitely been started to dealing with that ever since I started breaking out more into anti-racism work. And I get people that are not artists. And of course, I get the occasional person that wants to constantly just uphold or be willfully ignorant. And I've definitely had my share of comments told to me of like, you're just a dancer, like you're just doing this for bandwagon reasons or whatever, and for me, I just say like, well, if you don't really understand why I'm doing this in the first place, and you've never really understood why I dance in the first place, and it's the exact same thing of like, even when we're told, oh, you're just a basketball player. Like, why are you talking about politics? Why are you talking about racism? Not understanding that those things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I cannot be black and also expunge racism and then dribble a ball. Like, half the time we're doing that because we can't get accepted into another place of work because of how we look. Right. So it's like, okay, then we'll turn to something else that we do know that we're natural at. Right. And then we'll do that. But it's not like the moment.
I was like, please don't put me in basketball. Like,
no.
They were like, Tommy, you're 6'2". When are you getting on the basketball team? How about never? I don't ever want to. And it was like, why do people want to? And I didn't understand. One, I'm appreciating now how important basketball is to our culture, and at the same time, it is not the aspect of our culture that I am most fond of. I am a thinker. I am a musician. I am a healer. I am clumsy.
Yo, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've surprised my fellow, former friends that were white passing, that when I tell them like I don't know how to play basketball, and they're like, "What? You don't know how to play basketball?" I'm like, sorry to disappoint. I don't. Like, I'm a track and field runner, but I don't know how to play basketball. Sorry. I don't have coordination with the ball like that. And they're just shocked. And I'm like, I'm a dancer. I'm an artist. Like, that's what I thought. Like, we're not monolithic people. Like, all black people can play basketball. Like, no.
Or that's the only way that you can have coordination. That's the only way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I've had to, I did a live, it's maybe a few lives back, but I did a live, started doing these lives with Twitch. On his IG, because me and him are really, really great friends, and he wanted to use his platform to start educating his audience. So he brought me on, and it was one quite recently that I was talking about the 10 acts of whiteness. And obviously there's way more acts of it, but I was like, for the time's sake, we'll just name 10. So I did that, and at the end of it, the thing that I really specified on was how white people will use the whiteness of speaking and trying to minimize blackness by saying, you're only this, so don't speak about this. And I had to tell his audience, like, you have to stop telling Twitch that he's just a dancer. You have to stop putting him inside of a box as if we do this particular occupation and we're successful at it, that then all of a sudden makes us immune to experiencing racism. It doesn't work that way, right? So I was like, regardless if we had Obama as our president, regardless if we have Denzel Washington as one of like the top tier actors, right? Like regardless if we have Viola Davis as one of the top tier actors, it does not exclude us from experiencing racism all of a sudden because now we're successful, right? So I was like, you have to stop doing that because that is extremely violent. Because that means you're only picking the particular parts of blackness that make you feel comfortable. That
Have
make
you entertained.
Exactly. Because you know that if you look at the whole spectrum of blackness, you're then going to be confronted with a few of those particular things that get brought up. So you only want to pick apart the things that you don't have to deal with because you know what they're associated with. I'm like, it just doesn't work that way.
Tokenism's more comfortable.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. White people, we like our comfort. We need to step out of that.
Yes.
I see that made me start to wonder, sort of like, I'm not a historian, but like the origins of at what point then we start reducing people into this one thing or to their career pathways or whatever that one thing that we see that they do. And I was just like, we've never had the luxury of being one thing. We've always had to be nurturer, mother, father. We've always had to be cultivator of the field. We've had to be maker of our own destiny. We've had to be the rebuilder,
Yeah.
I'm just so curious. I feel as I'm beginning to dig into capitalism and its links towards racism a lot more, I think capitalism thrives on funneling you into this one thing or into this thing that you produce.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right? And that is because we live in such a consumer culture. It's so easy to quantify or summarize people into the thing it is that they produce.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm wondering if a key component of this anti-blackness or dismantling white supremacy for white people is expanding how they see people.
Yes.
And I firmly believe that we have roles to play, and like you use the term vessels, right? But I think about Jesus played many roles, right? Jesus was comforter, Jesus was healer. And we fix ourselves into these roles, but I think it's important in this work to know what is the role for the appropriate time, right? We are dynamic beings. And I think that's the beauty of art, is that art is dynamic. It teaches you to flow. It teaches you to improvise. But to be a part of the ensemble, to tell this beautiful story. And if we could only take that, what art gives us, and apply it into our everyday normal lives and recognize that we are all one ensemble, I'm like, oh my gosh, what could we be creating? We are here to create. And I like, rooting into white supremacy squashes out what we are naturally here to do in that creation.
It is.
The colonized white church that started this country doesn't want people to be creative, doesn't want people to evolve and move past. And so I think there's the very roots of that capitalism, other than the deep-seated greed, is the fact that if we don't think for ourselves and we don't challenge or evolve, so I really think this is a gift that you had to just like start thinking on your own. Like, that is an amazing, I don't know what else to call it, but a gift, because there's so much of white supremacy for white people that we are just on this track of, let's not expand our knowledge. Let's stop because we're afraid, because that's comfortable, and this is, I really have this gut feeling that this really stems back to the settlers coming over and because they were mistreated, and the actions that were placed upon them, they are just cycling. They're just cycling it through, and it is cycled through all of the generations, and it has never healed. And we keep hurting other people because our ancestors, I'm going to put air quotes, you can't see me, friends, hurt. And that's not a justification. That's needing to own our roots and how far it goes back. We're just, what are we afraid of? Dr. Shanika Walker Barnes said that until white people can accept who they are, how did she say it, Tommy? I'm butchering this. Do you remember what I'm saying?
Not on the spot, no.
But she said until white people until we can accept who we are, Black people won't be free because we are.
Until white people get free, Black people can't get free.
Thank you. That's much more fluid. And so, and it's not because white folks, it's not because we need to have it first. It's
Right.
because we live in a supremacy culture, and what I love about somatics when we talked with Aaron is we have to start sitting in our bodies. And the church has taught us not that our bodies are sinful and evil. And if we can't start sitting within our bodies, nobody's going to get free until we start making those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even to kind of expound on that, I think it's just because we live in such a conformity, reality and society where if you are seen as better than you become not a part. Even look at how we look at some of the celebrities, there's tons of times where we have kind of accepted celebs to not be human because they just aren't, they don't operate like us. So understand that we start to kind of dehumanize them and even how we idolize them. And that's something that I constantly have to recheck of like, no, they are human, so they're going to fuck up occasionally, because they're humans. And I actually had to speak on this about the whole Will and Jada thing of like, I was seeing a lot of my people try to run Will's name through the mud, of like joking on him, or both of them actually. And I'm just like, yo, like, is that really productive? Like these are two people who very much love each other, who chose to put their business out there on a public platform. And it's not like these people are not known. Like they're probably some of the most famous people that we know. I don't think they can go anywhere in the world and no one doesn't know who they are. So I think that in itself speaks to their vulnerability. So it's like the least we can do is offer up some safe space for them and not run them through the mud. But if we're not looking at them as humans, then we're going to do that just off GP because we don't see them as one of us. We see them as, oh, they're celebrities. So we can just make fun of them because then it just takes more attention away from our own insecurities, right? So therefore, it's going to put them on them. And I think this is something that we constantly perpetuate with anyone that seems to break away from the norm. It's something that I personally am facing right now in the dance community because I speak up so much, so therefore people think that I'm better than them because I speak up so much. And it's like, no. I actually believe in humanity so much that I'm going to speak on it every time that I see that we as humanity are self-defeating ourselves and we're not being authentic. I can't truly love you if I don't call out your shit.
Yeah.
Right? How does that work? You know what I mean? So I can't allow that to happen. So this is something I'm constantly facing because people do hold me at a very high standard. So now if they see me mess up once with one mistake, they're like, oh, I knew it. He's not legit. He's a false idol and all this other shit. I'm like, wait, really? This is what we're doing. This is where we're going.
To get vulnerable for a second, for you personally, and during that, I find myself transparently editing my words a lot before, or filtering through in my brain and refining them before they even come out of my mouth, which to a degree is a good thing.
Absolutely.
But also I think it can verge in the space of oppression. It can when it gets to the point to where you're so afraid to speak up or so afraid to make you can't live authentically. You can't we learn by failing for it. We learn by making mistakes. And I wonder if I appreciate call out culture. I appreciate call in culture. I think those things are needed, especially when it's in relation to speaking truth to power. But I think there are some people with nefarious purposes that are weaponizing that culture in a sense to to silence voices. And so I think
Absolutely.
about the effects on a person's mental being, their mental health. When one's life is one positioned to disrupt the dominant narrative. What does self-care look like for you in those spaces?
It's wild that you just brought that up because I recently went through that of someone who is a black brother who in the dance community that just tried to vilify me because I speak out so much and started calling out his own friends due to like misogyny and sexual assault, allegations and racism, like the whole nine. And they didn't like that. So he very much tried to call me out, if, as he put it, but really did it in a way that was very much vilifying and trying to run my name through the mud, so it just created way more division. And the very thing, and this is how I know it was not authentic, because the very things that he thought that I was doing to his friends, he actually perpetuated to me. So all of the very much like divisiveness he then created with him saying that he thought that I was being divisive, which I've never once canceled anyone, ever. In all of my call out videos I've made, I've never once like canceled them. I've always gave them steps on how to do better. I've always told them you need to get action. I've always said this is how you can be a better person, right? And I've always spoke to and made sure that I spoke to the actions that they did and never them as a person. So that way I'm not dehumanizing them. So,
well, it's also, I think there's a point too where we have to recognize that actions become the human, right?
Right. Yeah. That is true. That is true. Yeah.
And so I think what I appreciate about the anti-racist conversations, the nuance. You cannot be anti-racist without being nuanced, without rooting into paradox, without rooting into restoration.
Absolutely.
And so I think about this, in terms of Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy in one-on-one relationship. When there's something broken, there has to be repair. As we make mistakes, what acts do we engage upon repair? And I think we've settled into a culture of, and this gets into that aspect of white supremacy that is perfectionism. Perfectionism doesn't allow people to fail forward, doesn't allow people to make mistakes, doesn't allow people to step into that authentic growth. And so it says because you fucked up, you no longer deserve to be heard. And that who of us doesn't fuck up? Who has no sin cast that first stone?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think about that as black, you and me as black men, we have male privilege. And so there is aspects we have to one of the things I'm always worried about is, am I talking too much as it relates to like, is Becca engaged enough? Am I talking over? Those are things that I have to be aware of, the tone of my voice. And we're not exempt from the work. And so when people call us out, it's like, what is our disposition? Are we wanting to improve ourselves? Because if I'm going to position myself as someone advocating for anti-racist, and I tell people this all the time, anti-racist is anti-sexist, is being anti-homophobic. It's not just about
anti-white supremacy.
Yes.
Amen.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to even state it, because that's something that has very much opened my eyes to even intersectionality once I got into that work of anti-racism. I was like, oh, this is why trans people feel so oppressed. Like, okay, now I can get on board with that. Right? Like, oh, this is why it's called the LGBTQ+. Okay, now I can get on board with that. Like, it just gives me so much context to actually have, and then it sends me down that rabbit hole. And sends me down that rabbit hole. And I'm like, oh, word. Okay, now I can really get on board with all these things, because now everything has been lifted. So I think even inside of that, like for me, like the same guy did try to bring up very old, outdated news about me and views that I had about the LGBTQ when I was still Christian, right? But then what he failed to realize was that was years ago. So I was like, okay, you know what? That is something that was true. So I will clean that up. And I made a public video about it, in regards to the LGBTQ plus. And I was like, I just want to let y'all know I stand in solidarity with you all, period. Right. And I was like, yes, I might have had views in the past because I was Christian then, but obviously I do not have those same views now, so that way there is no confusion. But I think if there's any type of truth to something, like if anything, it makes us a better person to have to hold ourselves accountable. So that way we can show up in the work and lead by example as well. Because we can't expect other people to be vulnerable if we're not being vulnerable ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like that's another part of supremacy culture. The fact of, well, you were X at one time, so you must still be X now. And there's no way you could have evolved past to XYZ,
Yep.
It's that mindset. We have to start breaking down that mindset. And of course, and I'm sure he had no view of that as supremacy culture, but that's just this culture, this American Western culture that we live in. It's so ingrained.
Yep. It's literally what we learned, and I had a conversation with my half brother actually last night through text because I called him out on his homophobia. Because I shared a picture of 3 guys, that was pretty intimate, and he's like, oh, this looks suspect. And I was like, what do you mean by suspect? So we had discourse about that. And, at the end of the day, I thought he would have been open to receiving some knowledge, but he wasn't, and at the end of the day, he's just like, dude, like first you were dancing and now you want to be a freedom fighter. And he's like, pick a lane, bro. So I'm just like, you don't get it.
Why can't they be in the same lane, bro?
Right, exactly. So I'm just like, you don't get it. Like you look at things from a very binary option of like, you're either this or you're this. You can't be both. So I'm like, it's cool. Whatever. So
I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Rohr, but he that's been really instrumental. I don't know if I consider myself Christian. It depends on who's asking some days. But
I heard that.
But like he talks about and really breaks down this notion of duality, in beginning to step outside of living in through a non-dual lens. Stepping outside of the lens. And I love that saying, like, beyond the boundaries of right and wrong, there's a field and I'll meet you there. And that's the space that I find that traction. I probably just butchered that quote, but we're going to go with it for the sake of what
I love
we're
it.
about.
I love it. It works. It landed. It definitely landed.
But I want to honor that fact that you don't identify as Christian anymore and recognize that we typically ask guests at this point about like what salvation means to them, and that definitely carries a theological deliverance from sin and its consequences type of thing. But I want to ask you something similar, because for me, salvation and liberation are sort of going hand in hand. But in your art, so in your art, and through this journey, as you're doing this work within yourself, within your community, how are you finding and experiencing liberation?
It's something that I constantly battle with on a daily basis. There's still so much deeply rooted internalized racism within that I have to constantly break away from. So there's times where I get into spaces and I know that I'm in the right. I know that I have the right to be angry. But I still have to fight my other consciousness that is trying to assimilate. I still have to fight.
You better
with
talk
that.
about some W.E.B. Du Bois double consciousness right now.
I still have to fight with that to say to myself, it's okay to be angry. It doesn't matter if they didn't see the journey that you got to be angry in the first place. You know the journey you got to be angry in the first place. And that's all that matters. And that the people that really want to see that journey, they're going to be with you. So for me, I now start boiling it down to my real friends are always going to show up in the face of uncomfortability. Closer.
It makes me think about Dr. Patrice Berry's. Did you watch her today, Tommy?
Oh, yes.
Do you know who Dr. Patrice Berry is? So,
I don't.
she will...
I need you to follow her on Facebook. And I don't know what your meditative practice is, but if you need an online Black mama to speak into your soul every morning,
like, she's healing. Like, literally, like, I told Tommy, like, I feel like she's like otherworldly. Like, it's...
I'm gonna hit y'all up.
And white people, please don't call her Black mama. Please don't call her Black mama. White people.
No, don't go there.
That is reserved for people, for Black folks, for us young Black boys that need our Black mamas to make us stay on the straight and narrow. Okay? She's Dr. Patrice Berry to you all.
She's a brilliant woman, doctorate, social work. Like, she's just brilliant. The way she communicates,
profound.
It brings healing no matter what she's talking about. Like, Tommy introduced her to me only like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the reason I bring her up is she was talking about people's stories today. And she always has these amazing life experiences to share it through that lens. But just how we don't know people's stories and why they do and act in a certain way.
Right.
And don't judge it, because that could be what's bringing them something little happiness or knowledge. And we don't have the right to ever step into that and say that those things are not happening for that person.
Well, friends, you literally have only gotten a piece of Soul, because he's an artist, and he's so much of the art is visual. And so, Soul, how can people get to know you, see your work, be blessed by you, see how God is using you as a vessel these days?
Well, I have 3 IG accounts that I share, and they're all different. The first one is my main page, which is Jade Soul Zuberi. So that is where I do the bulk, or not the bulk, but most of my anti-racism work on there, as well as sharing a lot of my dance footage as well, artistry. The second page I have is _JAYSOUND. That's J Sound. And that is my music page. It's dedicated to music, and I just started recently promoting, once again, anti-racism work through there and finding ways to kind of like tie those things together. And then the last page I have is my photography and film page, and that is j.zuberi_. Yeah, that's where a lot of my cinematic knowledge goes to, where I tell stories through pictures and film. Yeah, I do have a Patreon, which that's on my main page and my link tree. So if any of you if any of you want to follow, I do all of my main work within decolonization and anti-racism work on my Patreon, from videos to articles to discussions, you name it, webinars, which I just did this weekend. So yeah, that's in my link tree. And I think that's pretty much it.
Friends, all of those links will be in our show notes as well. And something that we are very big on is that we do highly encourage you to not just consume the gifts that Soul is putting out there. Highly encourage you to join his Patreon page.
Pay the man.
Yes, I'm doing a really nice white pay the man. So let's just call that out about what it is.
Give the man your coins.
He has a Patreon tier of $5, and you can do way more than that. But $5, that's not even a cup of coffee. You know, and you're not getting a cup of coffee because you ain't going nowhere. So,
I mean, we're trying to go places, and
I
need y'all to stop trying to go places.
Believe me, I want to go leave my house.
I can't really go anywhere out here in Vegas. It's too damn hot. I gotta wait.
Yes,
I gotta
desert
wait
heat.
before it.
Yes, desert heat.
And it's dry, so it's just.
Blood.
Well, Jade.
I appreciate you both.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I keep saying Jade, but Jade Soul.
You can call me Jade, brother. You can call me. Both of y'all can call me Jade.
I know, but cool. I want to honor the art.
I want to honor
right?
the art.
I appreciate that. This is
We'll see you the next time you come back to talk to us.
Absolutely.
Because there will be a next time.
Absolutely.
No, there will be.
Part 2.
Right? Because this was just like the tip. Like, there's so much more.
We got to do a part 2. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Much respect to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Permission to Be. I'm your host, Becca Epley, and thank you to my good friend and co-host, Tommy Allgood. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and you'll never miss an episode. If you would leave us a rating and or review, we are always looking for more and more ways to hear from our listeners. You can find the links for today's guest in the show notes located at beckaepley.com.